Journalist Max Voyt burst onto the stage and challenged Melania Trump. "Take off the cross, or I will prove you are lying." A second later, the room exploded, and her response became the spark that set America on fire. The auditorium pulsed with anticipation. It was February 23rd, 2025, and the Future of America Forum was no ordinary event. A live broadcast beamed to millions, its stage bathed in blinding white light that cut through the shadows. The air buzzed with the hum of cameras, their lenses trained on the figure stepping forward, Melania Trump. Her black dress clung elegantly to her frame, a stark contrast to the small golden cross glinting on her chest. She took the microphone, her voice steady as she began to speak of freedom, of roots, of what held a nation together. The crowd leaned in, a sea of faces hanging on her every word, until a sharp clatter of footsteps shattered the moment. Max Voyt, a 32-year-old journalist with a razor-sharp tongue and a reputation for tearing down icons, leaped from the front row like a predator pouncing on prey. His dark eyes gleamed with intent as he snatched a microphone from a stunned technician. "Stop right there, Mrs. Trump." His voice boomed, slicing through her speech like a gunshot. "That cross around your neck, it's a relic of a dead world. Take it off right now, or I'll prove you're a hypocrite hiding behind faith." The words hit the room like a grenade, detonating gasps and whispers. Cameras swiveled frantically, zooming in on his smirk, then darting to Melania, whose hand instinctively brushed the cross, a gesture caught in vivid close-up on the massive screens overhead. The audience froze, the silence so thick you could hear the faint whine of the lighting rig. Social media erupted in real time. Hashtag Drop the Cross trended in seconds, tweets flashing like sparks. "She's done for," clashed with "He's gone too far." Melania stood still, her fingers lingering on the cross, the gold catching the light like a quiet defiance. Then she raised her eyes, locking them on Max with a gaze so cold and clear it could have stopped a storm. "You don't know what this means," she said, her voice low but piercing, each syllable deliberate. "This isn't for you, Max. It's for me, and I won't take it off." The statement landed like thunder, rolling through the hall and beyond. The crowd erupted. Cheers clashed with boos, a chaotic symphony of emotion. A man in the back shouted, "Crush him," while a woman near the stage hissed, "Prove it, then." In the control room, producers scrambled, their voices crackling through headsets. "He's off script. Shut it down." But the director snapped back, "No, this is gold." Max tilted his head, his lips curling into a wider grin as if he'd baited her into a trap. "Oh, come on," he taunted, stepping closer, microphone raised like sword. "Show us you're not afraid. Prove that cross means something. Or admit it's just a prop." The air thickened with tension, every eye glued to the stage. Melania didn't flinch. Her hand dropped from the cross, but her posture straightened, a tower of calm in the rising chaos. The cameras zoomed in again, catching the faintest flicker in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper, something unyielding. Social media flared hotter. Hashtag Melania Under Fire battled hashtag Stand With Melania, posts multiplying like wildfire. "She's toast," versus "He's about to regret this." In the auditorium, the hum of anticipation grew louder, a restless energy rippling through the seats. Then, as the noise peaked, Melania leaned slightly toward the microphone, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "You just woke something you can't stop," she said, so quietly it was almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a promise. Max's grin faltered for a split second, a crack in his armor the cameras didn't miss. The crowd felt it too, a shift, a spark igniting something bigger. This wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was the opening shot of a war, and the world was watching, holding its breath for what came next. Here's the second part of the story, Sharp Retort. Written in English with a length between 3,500 and 3,700 characters, including spaces and punctuation. It builds on the explosive tension of Part 1, escalating the confrontation between Melania Trump and Max Voyt with a razor-sharp exchange that showcases her strength and begins to unravel his confidence. The stakes rise, the crowd reacts, and the ending teases an even bigger turning point. The stage lights burned hotter now, casting stark shadows across the Future of America Forum. Melania Trump stood like a statue carved from ice, her black dress a midnight canvas for the golden cross that gleamed defiantly on her chest. Max Voyt's words still echoed. "Take it off, or I'll prove you're a hypocrite." And the auditorium thrummed with restless energy. The cameras, relentless, darted between them. Max, smirking with a microphone cocked like a weapon, and Melania, her silence a wall he couldn't breach. The crowd held its breath, caught in the electric pull of a standoff that had already spiraled beyond anyone's control. Max stepped closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come on, Mrs. Trump," he sneered. "That cross isn't strength, it's a chain. You're shackled to a past this country's outgrown. If you're so brave, ditch it. Or are you just scared to face the real world?" His taunt was a jagged blade, meant to cut deep, to draw blood in front of millions. The screens above magnified his grin, his dark eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. Social media flared. Hashtag drop the cross surged. Tweets like "she's crumbling," clashing with "he's a bully." In the control room, a producer muttered, "He's got her now," but the director shot back, "Wait, just watch." Melania didn't blink. Her hand rested lightly by her side, no longer touching the cross, as if it needed no defense. She tilted her head, just a fraction, a movement so subtle the cameras strained to catch it, and fixed Max with a look that could have frozen fire. "You think this is about fear?" Her voice was clear, steady, slicing through his bravado like glass. "This cross isn't a chain, Max. It's a root. In your real world, it's built on noise, empty words from a man who's afraid of silence." Each syllable landed like a hammer, precise and unyielding, turning his attack back on him with surgical grace. The auditorium erupted. Cheers roared from one side, boos from the other, a tidal wave of sound crashing over the stage. A woman in the front row leaped up, shouting, "Yes. Tell him," while a man near the back yelled, "She's dodging." Max flinched, barely, but enough for the cameras to catch the twitch in his jaw. He recovered fast, thrusting the microphone forward. "Empty words," he snapped, his tone sharper now, edged with something raw. "You're the one hiding behind faith. That cross divides us. Admit it divides America, or you're lying to every face here." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying a flicker of desperation. Melania's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Not triumph, but certainty. She stepped forward, closing the gap he'd tried to widen, her presence towering despite her calm. "You want division?" she said, her voice a quiet storm. "Look at yourself, Max. You're demanding I hide who I am to fit your truth. That's not unity, that's control. And America's stronger than your need to tear things down." The words were a whip, lashing back with a force that left him exposed. The crowd felt it, a shift, a crack in the air. Some stood, clapping wildly. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, hungry for his next move. Social media detonated. Hashtag Stand With Melania rocketed up the charts, drowning out hashtag Drop the Cross. Posts flew. "She just gutted him," battled "He's right, she's stuck." While the viewership spiked, millions tuning in as the numbers flashed on the control room screens. 15 million and climbing. Producers shouted over each other. "Zoom in. Get her face." Max gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles whitening. "Control," he shot back, his voice rising. "You're the one clinging to a symbol that offends half this nation. You can't handle the future." But the tremor in his tone gave him away. He was scrambling now, his armor dented. Melania didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned in, just enough for the cameras to catch the steel in her eyes, and said, "The future isn't yours to dictate, Max. It's ours, all of ours. And freedom means I don't bend to your fear." The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum sucking the noise from the room until the crowd exploded again. Applause, shouts, a chaotic chorus of awe and rage. Max's smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped glare. He'd come to break her, but she'd turned his blade against him, and the wound was starting to show. In the control room, chaos reigned. "She's killing it," a producer yelled, while another groaned, "He's losing them. Do something." The screens flickered with live reactions, emojis of fire and fists flooding the feeds. On stage, Melania stood unshaken, the cross a quiet beacon against her dress. Max took a step back, his breath quickening, his mind racing for a counterstrike. But the crowd's roar told the story. She'd struck deep, and the fight was far from over. Whatever came next, one thing was clear: Melania wasn't just defending herself. She was rewriting the rules of the game. The Future of America forum had become a pressure cooker, the air thick with heat and sound. Stage lights blazed down on Melania Trump, her black dress a shadow against the golden cross that shone like a silent vow. Across from her, Max Voyt gripped his microphone, his last words, "You can't handle the future," still ringing in the auditorium. Melania's reply had cut him open. "Freedom means I don't bend to your fear." The crowd was a live wire, buzzing with split loyalties, some cheering, some jeering, while cameras spun, capturing every flicker of the clash. Social media was a battlefield. Hashtag Stand With Melania surged past hashtag Drop the Cross, the numbers ticking up as millions watched, riveted. Then the dam broke. From the back of the hall, a voice cracked through the noise, a woman, her tone raw and trembling. "My son died with a cross like that on his chest," she shouted, standing shakily, clutching a worn photo of a young soldier, his uniform adorned with a tiny gold cross. Tears streaked her face, but her eyes burned with defiance. The cameras swung to her, the screens overhead flashing her image to the world. Before Max could respond, another voice erupted, a grizzled man in a wheelchair, medals pinned to his jacket, his hand raised like a flag. "I bled for this country's freedom," he roared. "You don't get to spit on it, kid." His words shook the air, heavy with pain and pride. The auditorium ignited. People leaped to their feet, a wave of bodies surging upright. "Freedom! Freedom!" they chanted, the word rolling like thunder from corner to corner. A mother near the stage hugged her daughter tight and cried out. Faith kept her alive through cancer. "I won't let you shame it." Her voice broke, but it carried, sparking more shouts. An old man wiped his eyes, muttering, "She's right," while a young couple filmed it all, their phones trembling in their hands. The screens flickered with the uproar, faces of anguish and resolve flashing in a mosaic of raw humanity. Social media exploded. Hashtag Faith Fights Back Sword, posts flooding in. "This is real America." Drowned out, "He's still got a point." Max stumbled back a step, his microphone dipping as the noise swallowed him. His eyes darted across the crowd, searching for an anchor, but the tide had turned. "Listen to me," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. "Your symbols divide us. I'm fighting for a future without walls." But the words sounded hollow, lost in the swell of voices. The crowd booed, a deep, rolling sound that shook the floor. Even his supporters, scattered figures in the stands wearing his signature "Truth Now" pins, shifted uncomfortably, some looking down, others whispering among themselves. The cameras caught it all, sweat beading on his forehead, the tight clench of his jaw, the way his hand shook around the microphone. Melania stood motionless, her cross a quiet star in the storm. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The people did it for her. Another voice rose, sharp and clear. "My brother built this country with a cross in his pocket." A construction worker, burly and red-faced, pointed at Max. "You don't speak for me." The crowd roared louder, some clapping, others stomping their feet until the seats rattled. A woman in the front row stood, holding up a cross of her own. "This isn't division. It's hope," she cried, tears shining in the spotlight. The chant of "freedom" grew deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to push Max further back, shrinking him under its weight. In the control room, pandemonium reigned. Screens showed the viewership spiking, 20 million now, a record shattering in real time. "This is insane," a producer shouted, slamming a fist on the console. "It's a movement," another yelled, pointing at the climbing numbers. The phone lines were jammed, callers flooding in with support for Melania, fury at Max, and stories of their own, lives tied to faith, to freedom. Social media was a wildfire. Hashtag Stand With Melania dominated. Memes of Max shrinking under the crowd's roar going viral. When you poke the wrong bear, one captioned his stunned face, racking up millions of likes. Max tried one last push. "You're all blind," he screamed, his voice hoarse, desperate. "This isn't freedom. It's nostalgia holding us back." But the crowd drowned him out, a sea of defiance he couldn't swim against. A teenage girl near the stage stood and pointed. "You don't get to erase us," she yelled, and the applause that followed was a thunderclap, shaking the air. Max's shoulders slumped, his breath ragged. He'd come to topple Melania. But the people had risen instead, their voices a force he hadn't reckoned with. Melania watched it unfold, her eyes tracing the crowd, not with triumph, but with a quiet gravity. The cross on her chest seemed to glow brighter, a symbol now bigger than her, carried by the stories pouring out. The cameras lingered on her, her calm a stark contrast to Max's unraveling. In the control room, the director whispered she didn't even need to fight. The chant of freedom rolled on, spilling beyond the auditorium into homes and streets across the nation. Max clutched his microphone like a lifeline, but his grip was slipping. The people had spoken, and their wave was about to crash harder than he could ever imagine. The Future of America Forum was a cauldron of raw energy, the stage lights searing through the haze of shouted voices. Melania Trump stood unwavering, her black dress a silhouette of resolve, the golden cross on her chest a quiet flame amid the storm. Across from her, Max Voyt was faltering, his microphone trembling in his grip as the crowd chant, "Freedom, freedom," still reverberated from their uprising. He tried to rally, screaming about a future unshackled by symbols. But the people had drowned him out, their stories of faith and sacrifice a tidal wave he couldn't hold back. The cameras circled like vultures, the screens pulsing with the crowd's fury, while social media churned. Hashtag Faith Fights Back overtaking every corner of the digital battlefield. Then, without warning, the massive screens flared to life with a jolt of static. A grainy video flickered on, the sound crackling through the speakers. A younger Max Voyt, no older than 16, standing in a dimly lit church. His hair was shorter, his face softer, but the voice was unmistakable. He held a golden cross necklace, identical to Melania's, close to his chest, his eyes shut as he spoke, reverent and clear. "Faith is my strength. It's what keeps me going." The footage wobbled, clearly shot on old phone, but the words cut through the chaos like a blade. He knelt, head bowed, the cross glinting as he murmured a prayer, a boy wrapped in belief he'd since buried. The auditorium went deathly still, a collective gasp sucking the air from the room. Then it shattered. Cries of "hypocrite" erupted from the stands, sharp and venomous. "What the hell?" a man bellowed, while a woman near the front shot to her feet, pointing at Max. "You liar." The cameras swiveled to him, zooming in as his face drained of color, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't mask. The screens looped the clip, Max's younger self praying, the cross dangling in his hands. Each frame a hammer blow to the image he'd built. Social media detonated. Hashtag Max Exposed rocketed to the top, tweets screaming, "He's a fraud." Alongside "Truth always comes out." As the video spread like wildfire, millions sharing it in seconds. Melania stepped forward, her presence cutting through the uproar. Her eyes locked on Max, not with scorn, but with a piercing clarity that seemed to see straight through him. "You believed once, Max," she said, her voice soft yet resounding, carrying over the chaos. "Why did you turn your back on yourself?" The question hung there, gentle but devastating, a lifeline tossed into his collapse. The crowd hushed, leaning in, waiting for him to answer. Max's mouth opened, then shut, his breath hitching as he struggled for words. He stammered, his voice a broken thread. "I wanted to be stronger." The admission slipped out, frail and raw, and his head dropped, the microphone slipping to his side. The room exploded again, but the tone shifted, anger mixed with gasps, some with murmurs of pity. "He deserves it," a man shouted from the back, fists clenched, while a woman near the stage whispered, "He's just human." through tears. The cameras captured it all. Max sinking onto a chair, his shoulders caving, sweat streaking his face. Melania standing tall, her cross a steady light. Social media split wide open. Hashtag stand with Melania sword beside hashtag Max exposed. Memes flashing. When your past catches up, one captioned his stunned face, racking up views. Another showed him praying with oops, wrong script. The internet merciless in its speed. In the control room, panic reigned. Who leaked that? The director roared, slamming his headset down. Doesn't matter, it's viral. An assistant shot back, pointing at the screens. 25 million viewers now, the numbers climbing like a rocket. The phone lines were a war zone, callers raging at Max, praising Melania, or spilling their own confessions. On stage, Max's hands shook, tears welling as he stared at the floor, the weight of his own history crushing him. He'd stormed in to destroy her, but now he was a shadow, unraveling under the glare of a truth he couldn't outrun. Melania watched him, her expression softening, not with victory, but with something deeper. She spoke again, her voice a bomb in the fire. "This isn't about breaking you, Max," she said, stepping closer. "It's about remembering who you are." The words were a bridge, an offer amid the wreckage. The crowd stirred, a slow ripple of applause starting. First a few, then a swell, some standing with tears, others nodding in quiet awe. A woman in the front lifted her own cross and called out, "Thank you, Melania," while a man nearby muttered, "Maybe he's not all wrong." The noise grew, a messy blend of judgment and grace. Max looked up, his eyes red and glistening, meeting hers for the first time without fight. "I didn't know," he whispered, barely audible, before his hands covered his face, hiding the tears that streaked down. The cameras lingered, the screens freezing on his collapse and her calm. Social media roared on, historic meltdown, clashed with she's unstoppable. But on stage, the moment was still. Melania stepped back, her cross shining like a beacon of something unbroken. She hadn't just won. She'd turned his attack into a mirror, and the reflection was about to change everything. Here's the fifth and final part of the story, triumph and forgiveness. Written in English with a length between 3,500 and 3,700 characters, including spaces and punctuation. It resolves the escalating drama from the previous parts, delivering an emotional climax where Melania Trump's strength shines through compassion, Max Voyt finds redemption, and the narrative closes with a unifying message. The ending leaves a lasting impact, blending triumph with hope. Part 5. Triumph and Forgiveness. The Future of America Forum had become something sacred. It staged a crucible where light and shadow collided. The air hummed with aftermath. Max Voyt's exposed past still flickering in the crowd's murmurs, his teenage prayer echoing in their minds. He sat crumpled on a chair, hands covering his tear-streaked face, the microphone abandoned at his feet. Across from him, Melania Trump stood like a pillar, her black dress stark against the golden cross that glowed with quiet power. The auditorium was a tapestry of emotion, anger, awe, and something softer weaving through the seats after her words. "This isn't about breaking you, Max. It's about remembering who you are." The cameras hovered, the screens dark now, but the moment pulsed alive. Melania took a step toward him, her heels whispering against the stage. The crowd hushed, 1,000 eyes tracking her, the weight of millions more pressing through the broadcast. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "Faith isn't a sword," she said, her tone steady, warm, cutting through the lingering chaos. "It's a way back home." The words settled like dusk, soft but unshakable. Then, in a move that stole the breath from the room, she reached out, her hand open, not in judgment but in grace. Max's head lifted, his red-rimmed eyes meeting hers, raw and searching. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Two figures, once foes, bound by a thread the fight had unraveled. "Forgive me," Max whispered, his voice breaking, so faint it barely reached the microphones. The crowd gasped, some wiping tears, others leaning forward as if to catch every tremble. Melania didn't hesitate. She closed the distance, her hand resting on his shoulder with a gentleness that belied the storm they'd weathered. Then, bending slightly, she wrapped him in an embrace. The cross brushed his cheek, a fleeting touch of gold, and the auditorium erupted, not in chaos, but in a swell of applause that rose like a hymn. People stood, clapping through tears, hugging strangers beside them. The sound was a wave, washing over the stage, the control room, the nation watching beyond. The cameras captured every second. Max's face pressed against her shoulder, his body shaking as tears soaked her dress. Melania's eyes, glistening with a mix of resolve and tenderness. A woman in the front row raised her own cross, shouting, "Thank you for showing us," her voice thick with emotion. A young man nearby, still wearing a Truth Now pin, murmured, "Maybe she's right." His phone slipping into his pocket, forgotten. Social media lit up. Hashtag Stand With Melania held strong, but a new tag surged beside it. Hashtag Faith Unites, paired with snapshots of the embrace, spreading like a beacon across the digital sea. In the control room, the frenzy stilled. Screens flashed 30 million viewers, a historic peak, and the director, eyes wet, whispered, "This is bigger than us." Producers stared, speechless, as the phone lines buckled under calls. Gratitude, confessions, stories of crosses, and second chances pouring in. Online, the chatter was relentless. "She changed the game," clashed with "I'll never forget this," while memes of the hug captioned, "When faith wins with love," went viral, etching the moment into eternity. Max pulled back slowly, his face a mess of tears and smeared resolve. "I didn't know what I'd lost," he said, louder now, his voice steadier, stripped of its old armor. Melania released him gently, stepping back to let the words breathe. She turned to the crowd, the cameras, her gaze sweeping over them all. "Faith isn't weakness," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. "It lifts us when we fall, binds us when we break. I wear this cross to remember who I am, and to love even those who challenge me." The statement was a cornerstone, sealing the night with a truth that rang beyond the stage. The auditorium burst into a final ovation. People embraced, prayed, wept, a chaos of unity spilling through the rows. A mother cried out, "For my sick boy, thank you," while a veteran in the back raised a trembling salute. "God bless you, Melania." Max stayed seated, his head bowed, but his hands no longer shook. Something had shifted, a crack of light through his guarded shell, sparked by the woman who'd refused to crush him. The screens flickered with the crowd's faces, a mirror of a nation stirred awake. Social media crowned the moment immortal. "This is history," one user wrote, while another shared, "She didn't just win, she gave us hope." Images of the cross, the hug, Max's tears burned into the collective memory. In the control room, producers let the cameras roll, capturing every raw second as the credits loomed. The forum had begun as a clash, but it ended as a reckoning, not of hate, not of hollow triumph, but of redemption born from fire. Melania gave the crowd one last look, her eyes bright with a peace that needed no words. Then, with the cross shining like a steadfast star, she stepped off the stage, leaving Max, the audience, and a watching world forever changed. The chant of freedom faded into quiet, but its echo lingered, a promise woven into the fabric of the night. What started as a challenge had become a movement, and as the lights dimmed, millions knew they'd seen something eternal, a victory of faith that didn't divide, but healed.